Oh, hello. Welcome to the 2013 Hundie Challenge. Today we're going to be discussing The First Wives Club by Benedict Arnold. Dee-doo-dee-doo-doo, dee-doo-dee-doo-dee-doo-dee-doo-doo, dee-doo-dee-doo-doo, dee-doo-dee-doo-dee-doo-dee-doo-doo. Okay, I want to start off by saying that this is not a bad book. It's not a terrible book by any means. It's a damn sight better than The Death of the Heart, which I just couldn't even read it in the normal sense. So The Old Wives' Tale, it's readable, it's, mildly interesting. I guess what I want to talk about more than just the book is kind of this whole oeuvre of the turn of the 20th century England, which I've now read a couple of books all set in that time period. Sons and Lovers, Old Wives' Tale, Sister Carrie that was an American book, but it was kind of this genre. The story of the Old Wives' Tale is very simple. There's two sisters. They grow up in just kind of provincial England. One sister decides to run off with this scamp and starts a scandal in the little town that they live in. And she lives in Paris. And the other sister stays in town, does what's expected of her, marries a local, has a kid, does all that stuff. The other one, she goes to Paris, lives there for her 30 years. She never has a kid. She runs a hotel. They call it a pension, which I guess is a little different than a hotel. And then they, at the end of their lives, a mutual acquaintance spots the lady in Paris and lets her sister know, who didn't know what had happened to her, that she was still alive. They come back together. They both die. It was kind of interesting. My problem with these books, with this type of book, is that they're kind of very dull. And they kind of feel the obligation to tell you the whole story of the main character from the cradle to the grave. And I understand they come from a different time. But a modern book, there's a saying, there's an axiom. You start when the story starts. Okay? So if your story doesn't start until Luke is 19 years old and he's a farm boy on Tatooine, that's when you start the story. You don't need to know that he was born on Tatooine and he spent 19 years fixing up the boring-ass farm. With this whole time period, with the Sons and the Lovers and Old Wives' Tale and all that, they feel the need to bring you up to speed on everything that happened in that person's life, how they spent this 6 months, that 6 months, how they found their dog, how just the whole life is there. And, it's nice that every chapter something marginally interesting happens. And again, I understand it's a different time period. Like the early chapter, there was an elephant that went feral and then they killed it, which was kind of interesting. And then in the later chapters, the sister Sophia, who lives in Paris, she lived through the siege of Paris in the 1870s, which was kind of when Bismarck first united the German Empire, kind of the first steps towards the world wars and Germany as a single power and that sort of thing in Europe. But here's the problem with that. The siege of Paris could have been really interesting depending on the perspective that you showed and that kind of thing. But they insisted on talking about how Sophia went down to the market and bought some food to stock up and, what the prices were like on the foods as time went by and all the different boarders that she had coming and living in her little hostel and what they were like. And, the one night when she forgot to lock the door and one of the boarders walked in on her. And it's just like on and on and on. And I'm like, okay, there's no reason why the 1870 siege of Paris needs to be this dull. Excuse me. So it's kind of deadening after a while. I don't hate it, but I'm just like, I keep reading and I keep reading and I keep reading. It's just like a slog, these kind of books. But it was a damn sight better than Death of the Heart. I don't know why I keep going back to that. It was just the last one that I read. So it's not very interesting, but as a glimpse of that lifestyle, it's kind of interesting. One of the other things that bugs me about this whole oeuvre, this whole time period, is how, like, I want to say uptight, but I know they're not really uptight for their period. There's just, like, there were different rules of behavior and that kind of thing. So, like, I'll be reading a chapter, and then somebody will just, like, fly off the handle. And I'll be like, I don't even know why this person, they were just having an ordinary conversation, and then somebody said something, and then they'll just be like, oh, whoa, I'm all in a huff now. Because apparently, like, when you break these little social rules, and they're, like, really peculiar. Like, I don't know enough about the time period to get when some kind of really important social rule was broken. But it'll be like, oh, she wanted to talk to a man without her father present, and that was like a big scandal, or like somebody said something. It's just it's a little hard to keep track of why people feel the way they do when, I mean, it's only been 150 years or so. I guess this started, they mentioned the American Civil War at the beginning of it. But it's really hard to feel the outrage that the characters feel, because in only 150 years, like, these things don't even register for me anymore. The sorts of things that people get into a tiff about in 1870s rural England are like things that you would see on the street today, that you would be like, oh, how polite of them. In any case, not a terrible book. I don't strongly recommend it. It was a little long for my tastes, and a little long in the tooth. One of the saving graces of Sons and Lovers was, again, it was like this, that I felt the need to tell you what happened every second of everybody's life, but it was a little shorter, and, they kind of passed through it quickly. And it wasn't even that great of the main promise for me was that we were going to get to hear about the siege of Paris, and it was kind of like, oh, well, she stocked up on hams, and she was very wise, and came through it like a great landlord. In any case, The Old Wives' Tale, not really my cup of tea. There's a little pun for you. Thanks for tuning in. Next time we will be looking at A Room with a View by E.M. Forster.